And vase breath is one of the kinds of meditative disciplines that really will Hello, everybody. I'm talking a little bit about in the calligraphy room here at CTDB. Just very briefly, because I'm testing out this video. On the analytical meditation, as spoken about in the Shurangama Sutra. Now, most people know the Shurangama for its mantra, but its mantra is half of the story. But it seems to be the whole story for a lot of people. And that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about the analytical meditation aspect of the Shurangama. Because if you understand that, then you will understand how to recite the mantra properly, how to set your mind correctly so that it really works, the mantra really works, and your mind really works. So, and that's why, in fact, the Shurangama mantra itself isn't spoken about until maybe about 150 pages of text, three quarters or at least half of the text is prior to the mantra discussion. And therefore, it's there for a reason. And that's so when you do get to the mantra, you can do it right. Frame your mind correctly. And that's what it's all about. I think everyone who studies the Shurangama reads the entire text or prior to, and you know, makes an effort to memorize the mantra or part of it. But the part of the text that is dealing with analytical meditations, it may seem unapproachable to a lot of people. People may not understand how to correctly do it. Not because what the Buddha is explaining is so difficult, actually because it's so easy. For example, the Buddha says to Ananda, you know, rub your palms together. Where does the heat come from? You know? And where does it go when it stops? Well, that seems so simple, right? What's there to talk about? You know, it comes from the hands, of course, right? It's friction. Yeah, but what's that come from? If the friction comes from the hands, I mean, if the heat comes from the hands, then why does the hands hot all the time? If it comes from the space, you know, empty space, why is the empty space warm all the time? What is friction? Well, you're rubbing the two palms together and it's creating heat. Where is the heat coming from? Is it coming from the hands? Is it coming from empty space? Where is it coming from? It seems so simple. Where do you begin a meditation like that? Of course, it's just friction, right? So, but why did the Buddha ask Ananda if it's so simple? It's not that simple. It takes time. You got to work through those contemplations. The Buddha also later on talks about the hearing, taking hearing as a topic of meditation. How does that work? How does one do that? Well, Buddha says to Ananda, he asked Rahula, first of all, ring the bell. So Ananda rings a giant bell, and the whole assembly hears a sound. And Buddha says to Ananda, did you hear that? Yeah, I heard it. Of course I heard it. Everybody heard it. And then Buddha says, why did you hear it? Well, the bell was rung, I heard the sound. And Buddha says to ring the bell again. And then the Buddha says, did you hear that? And yeah. Then the bell became quiet. And the Buddha says, is there sound now? And I said, no, there's no sound. Then the Buddha says to Rahula, ring the bell again. Rahula rings the bell again. Buddha says to Ananda, did you hear it? Ananda says, yeah. The Buddha says, was there any sound? Yeah, there was sound. Rahula won't run the bell, there was sound. Then the sound, slowly, the bell stops vibrating and becomes completely silent. And then the Buddha said to Ananda, is there any hearing now? And then he said, no, there's no hearing now. So the Buddha pulled a fast one on Ananda. Did you catch it? First, when the bell became silent, the Buddha said, is there any sound? Ananda said, no, there's no sound. But the second time, clever Buddha trapping Ananda said, is there any hearing? And Ananda fell right into it. He said, no, there's no hearing. And then Buddha opened him up to a contradiction. He says, well, if there's no hearing, how do you know there's no sound? So you see, the point is that there's hearing going on all the time, and we mix up sound with hearing. Now, it might seem like it's just a play on words and whatnot, but it goes deeper than that. Because if you really think about it, if you really think about the whole situation, you look into it, well, it gets a little bit more than it appears, because we associate hearing with sound. And when we meditate, we listen to a mantra, or we recite a mantra, and our ear hears that the word images that we make. If we're reciting silently mantras, we're creating word images. And these are just kind of interior sounds. And if we're reciting out loud, of course, we're reciting regular sounds. Now, that we hear with our ears. But regardless, it's a kind of hearing. But what the Buddha is getting at is that there's a kind of hearing that's not dependent on any kind of sound at all. But Ananda assumes that hearing is dependent on sound, and so do I, and so do you and me. And the reason is we're conditioned to think that way. And so the Buddha is bringing up this analysis, and the analysis of rubbing the palms together, and a few others, which we might mention later. They seem very rudimentary and obvious, and not worth contemplating, but they are. And in this example, what is hearing without sound? Can you get deep into your mind and find the hearing nature? That's what the Buddha is pointing at. Can you find that nature that's not dependent on condition, not conditioned? The hearing nature that's not conditioned. The seeing nature that's not conditioned. Ananda is asked by the Buddha, well, why'd you come here anyway? I'm doing my teaching, what are you doing here? And so Ananda says, well, I'm your cousin, and your purple golden body is so gorgeous, I just couldn't help myself. I just wanted to come and look at you. So the Buddha said, well, what did you use to see me? And Ananda, of course, said, my eyes, what do you think? And the Buddha says, yeah, well, did your eyeballs go to me, or did my form come to your eyes? And this really leads to a whole discussion on about how seeing takes place. Now, it seems very apparent to all of us, like if somebody asks us, how do you see that tree? Well, I see it with my eyes. How else? But believe it or not, it's an assumption. And that assumption is something that can be thought about very deeply. And it's called epistemology, how we know things. And for example, in the case of seeing, the Buddha says to Ananda, okay, so you saw me with your eyes. Now, did your eyeballs leave your head and come find the Buddha? Or if the Buddha didn't go to your eyeballs and your eyeballs went to the Buddha, how did your eyeballs even know where to look? Did they just go looking around everywhere until they kind of bumped into the Buddha like somebody in the dark? And so Ananda thought that, well, this is not really the way it happens. Although, of course, the Hindus believe it does happen that way. They talk about the indriyas of all the senses. And they're kind of like messengers that go out through the eyes and the ears and bring back whatever information they're sent out to fetch. Buddhists reject this. They say there's no seeing in the eyes or hearing in the ears or anything like that. But let's keep to the example of the eyes. What they say is that basically there's a form that makes an impinges on the eyeball. That form has no content whatsoever. It's just an image of whatever is seen. And that image is not known by the eye. That image is categorized according to everything that is not by the mind. So it goes through sort of like creating an isotope. You eliminate everything that is not, and what remains is what it is. And that's how seeing is supposed to take place. We don't see a cow as a cow. We see a cow as not a cow. That's how seeing takes place. It's an eliminative process. And it's done by the mind. And even in the Shurangama, it says seeing takes place in the mind, not the eyes. The eyes reveal the form itself. The mind, through an eliminative process of everything that form isn't. It's like a categorizing. It categorizes everything. It has everything in its categories, and then it eliminates all that is not. And the last thing that's in the categories is that what it is, like an isotope, like scientists do these isotopes. So basically, this is a contemplation, in the Shurangama, and the hearing with the bell and Rahula, it's a contemplation. It's supposed to be thought about. And when we do this analytical meditation, we really sound really ridiculous, It's like you have to verbalize it. You cannot just sit there and think, how does sound come to my ears? And then just kind of listen and see what you hear and say, oh, I hear a bird off in the distance. and I hear somebody using the washroom. And if you do this, you'll get pretty tired fast, and you'll start to muse. You might start thinking about what you got to do later on in the day, and you'll catch yourself way off topic, musing about this thing and that thing, not going into anything very deeply. So for analytical meditation to work, as described in the Shurangama, you take one of these simple contemplations, just like Ananda got all tangled up with the Buddha. You can even use that as a starting place. And you start saying to yourself, well, how do I see anything? You know, when I look at a vase, for example, or a cow, how do I know it's a cow? How does the image get to my eyes? Does my eye go there, or does the cow come to my eye? Is there any discriminating consciousness in the eye? You know, the Hindus, the Navya Naya believe that there's a discriminating faculty in the eyeball itself that knows things as it is. And this is what the Buddhists reject. But you think about it yourself. You don't go by what you read in the book, you know, like what the Mimamsakas or the Vaishikas or the Samkhyas say about it. You think in your own language, well, how do I see anything? You know, do I see anything because the image comes to me? If I see things because the image comes to me, you know, the Nobel Prize winner for physics for his work on light, Richard Feynman, he's incredible. Anybody who enjoys physics and the relation of physics to Buddhism, although he never mentions Buddhism, will find much of what he says is talked about by the Buddha. For example, Feynman discusses this very thing that the Buddha asked Ananda. He says, does the image go to you? Because Ananda thought it did. So what Feynman says, well, if it goes to you, then if somebody's sitting adjacent to you, why doesn't that person see the image going to you? Buddha asks Ananda this, you know. Feynman asks the same question. They're 2,400 or so years apart. Think about it. So you use your common sense and you don't repeat what you read in books. And it's extremely tedious, but you try and keep a flow of words going that has some mediocre logic to it. It's hard to get really any kind of in-depth, strong logic to something is simple, is what we're talking about. But you keep a flow of words going. And the reason you do is, if you don't, you'll fall into musing. You won't be able to avoid it. You'll get off topic really fast. So words kind of are limiters to our mind's functioning. And so even if you don't seem to be making a lot of sense, if you can just say, well, the form comes to my eyes, and don't feel ridiculous. And then, you know, say, well, if it comes to my eyes, how do I know what it is? Does the eye know what's getting imprinted in it, in the back of the eye? How does it happen that I know it's a cow or a vase? How do I associate it with the word? Do I associate it with the word cow or vase directly? Well, the image that's coming to the eye, since the eye cannot discriminate, must just be an imprint. So that imprint doesn't have a name associated with it. So how does it happen that a name gets associated with this imprint? Well, maybe the mind goes through a bunch of images that does have words associated with them. And it notices that, you know, this thing that I have in this imprint that I have, that I don't know what it is. You know, it has a dewlap and hooves, and it's got this udder that gives delicious milk and so forth. And that thing in my brain is categorized as a cow. It's associated with the word cow. And therefore, that thing that's imprint in my eye seems pretty much the same thing, and therefore that's how I know it's a cow. Seems straightforward enough, right? But most Mahayana Buddhists reject that. They say what actually happens is you go through all the images in your mind and all the words in your mind. Let's say you're looking for a cow, and the image in your eye is a cow, but you don't know it's a cow. You just know there's an image there. So you're trying to figure out what it is. You don't go through everything until you come up with the cow. And then you say, that's what it is. What actually happens, believe it or not, is you go through all the images in your mind that it doesn't match up with until you've exhausted every single one but one. It's that image. That's the cow. So it's not direct like we think it is. That's why, you know, if you read that's the secret behind a lot of koans, by the way, not this. It's not this. It's not just trying to be clever, like it's not a cow. So why not just say it's a cow? It's the reason we don't is because our mind doesn't function that way. Our mind functions by elimination. It's sort of like when you go in the refrigerator looking for peanut butter. You eliminate everything else and there it is, the peanut butter. It's like that. So you keep a dialogue going with yourself in this analytical meditation as best you can. And don't fear sounding ridiculous. Try and be logical in some way, you know. Try and have some kind of logic to your analytical meditation, some kind of reason, you know, so you're not complete nonsense. It can be really mundane reasoning, but at least keep the words going, because that is the limitor that keeps you from musing about this and that and false thinking. And believe it or not, after you practice for a while, you'll find that you start getting engaged, the gears will mesh, something will mesh in your head. And the reasoning takes hold, and you start getting deeper and deeper, just like you would into a mantra. You get deeper and deeper, and the reasoning starts to make sense and mesh with the reality, the world. When this happens, that's engagement, and it's very, 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 very powerful. And that's what will help a lot once you learn to get engaged like that with mantra recitation and keep you from being just on the surface reciting a bunch of syllables. It'll help you get engaged with the mantra. So that's why the entire front portion of the Shurangama Sutra uses all of these very, very basic forms of analytical meditation. He asks on the very basic things. You know, what's the nature of space? Oh, it's just like, you know, does it exist or not exist? And then Ananda says, of course it exists. You know, and the Buddha says, well, if you pack up a triangular box with, you know, empty inside, and take it to the other side of the county and you pour it out, do you see any triangular space emerging? So how could you say it exists as a triangle? It seems really simple and ridiculous, these kind of questions. But if you pursue them, you get engaged with the question and you start making a lot of sense, lots and lots of sense. And once the engagement takes place, then you are preparing yourself to really recite the mantra in a deep way. For myself, even after practicing years of this analytical meditation, when I sit down, I sound really stupid for at least a half hour or so. But once I start getting engaged, the time just flies. flies faster than it ever did with the mantra. So you can obviously enter very, very deep states through this analytical meditation. And that's why the Buddha recommends it. And it's not just the Buddha who recommends it, by the way, it's a lot of great masters. Almost all schools of Buddhism, except, maybe Dzogchen and a few Tibetan schools, Mimapas, they don't emphasize it, although they practice it to a certain extent, but it's not emphasized. Chan, of course, being a school that it does emphasize it in a way that most people aren't aware of. But if you just use your common sense, you'll see that it emphasizes it a lot. If you just study the sutras, you'll know that these questions are real. They're meant to be used as meditation topics. So we'll just conclude this talk here. Hope you enjoyed it. Okay.